Let's be consistent.
Welcome to The Key to Consistency. I am your host, Rakia Collins, and on today's episode, we are going to be exploring the relationship between consistency and reading. I am so excited to get into this topic because I personally love to read, and so hopefully you guys can learn something from today's episode about the benefits of reading. So when we think about, why do we want to be consistent readers anyway? When we think about some of the benefits that come from reading, we're able to expand our vocabulary, right? We're able to increase our comprehension skills and really enrich our minds with new ideas and new perspectives and really go through a journey on the pages that we're reading to really expedite our process of self-improvement. And I want to be clear that it doesn't necessarily matter that you may, let's say, enjoy reading nonfiction or reading fiction. There are books, even if they don't necessarily appeal to everyone, we all have our own genre of book that we like to read, right? But when you're reading those books, you're going to pick up on a new word, right? That you might not have known before. You're going to be able to expand your horizon. If you love to read books about different places and different parts of the world, you are really literally going to be on a journey of expanding your mind and expanding the way that you see the world, right? I will never forget when I was younger, I did not like geography. I did not like, reading about geography. I did not like having to know or learn facts about the East. Like I just wasn't a fan of, I just didn't find it beneficial, right? And it's so interesting because now that I'm older, I enjoy those types of facts and like that type of information. I enjoy understanding about Europe and reading about Asia and the cuisine. And like, it's just so much that reading exposes you to. So I would encourage you that if you're not a reader, even if you aren't necessarily the person who likes to have a paperback book, you may be an Audible gal or an Audible guy, right? Like you can still listen to an audiobook and still reap the benefits of reading. When we think about regular reading, it really as a workout for our brains, right? Every single time we turn a page, we are expanding our vocabulary. There are words that we can adopt from the words that we're reading on the page and put them in our everyday lives, right? And of course, not to seem braggadocious or anything, but when you go to someone and you speak to someone and you use a new term or use a new word or use a new phrase, that person's like, well, what does that mean? And it's giving you the ability now to become a teacher and to expand someone else's horizon, right? And so there are so many benefits to reading that it's just something that I would encourage you, if you don't do now, to make sure that you do, right? Outside of expanding your vocabulary and expanding your comprehension, reading can really foster a sense of mindfulness as well. There are people who enjoy reading before going to bed because it takes their mind out of the current situation that it's in, and the words on the page really come alive, right? This can happen especially if you like to read sci-fi books and the author is just eloquently explaining the environment that the main character is in. They are using their vocabulary that they've picked up to paint a picture in your mind. There are so many benefits outside of expanding your vocabulary as to why reading is a great exercise. It can also profoundly impact your emotional well-being. I just mentioned seeing it as mindfulness, but you could also look at reading as a place to find solace, right? A place to just be at peace, right? There are people, interestingly enough, who, when I go to the gym in the morning, I see them on the treadmill and they're reading books. I personally can't understand the combination, but knowing that reading can transplant you into a different environment, into a different space. It's like, why not go to the gym, do something that I may not necessarily want to do, but my mind is focusing on something that I actually want to do, and that is reading this book. Right. So when we think about books and some of the benefits we talked about already, expanding your vocabulary, increasing your comprehension, and being in a space of mindfulness and really finding solace, I would encourage you to really pick up a book that resonates with you. And again, it doesn't matter the genre, it doesn't matter the topic, right? I would encourage you to read, because if you're going to read something that you're not necessarily interested in, you're not going to continue reading that book, right? You may pick the first 2 or 3 pages and then it's like, that's it, right? And then the book just goes on a shelf somewhere or in a closet somewhere and it just collects dust, versus actually reading something that you genuinely want to read. You're genuinely you're captivated by it. That I'd say would be the first action step, is to make sure that you're reading something that will just get you in the habit of reading. Today's episode is brought to you by the merch shop at thekeytoconsistency.com. I would encourage you to visit our merch shop to see if there's anything that piques your interest. One of the easiest ways to be consistent is to be visually reminded that you are on a mission. You are going to be consistent. So whether you pick up a phone case or you pick up a t-shirt, we have something for you. Again, that is www.thekeytoconsistency.com. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Awesome, guys. The next thing that I want to talk to you all about is going to be establishing a reading routine. When you think about being consistent in your reading, it is and should be a delightful part of your day, right? I know that there are things that we can partake in on a daily basis that don't necessarily give us energy, that don't necessarily brighten our day. We don't want reading to be that, right? We want reading to be something that we look forward to doing. We want to make sure that we carve out time and create a space, whether it's like a cozy little reading nook in your room, or you create a space in your living room, or wherever you find space to say, when I go in this particular part of my home, I'm taking my book with me. And whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however many minutes you can sneak away, this is what we're going to do. We're going to read this book, right? When we think about life, there's so much going on, right? Especially depending on the roles that you play in your home, right? And even outside of your home. That is why it is crucial to make sure that you have dedicated reading time. It is essential, right? Even if it's a few minutes before bed, if it's during your lunch break, maybe it's like you're having a lazy weekend morning, and before you do anything, you want to just roll over and you want to pick up a book, right? It doesn't necessarily matter the where, it just needs to be consistent. So if you read consistently in the morning, if you read consistently at lunch, if you do it consistently before bed, if you do it consistently when you're in the car and you're listening to an audiobook, right? Whatever you do, make sure that as much as you possibly can, you do it consistently around the same time, because what that allows for is muscle memory. And you get to the point where when something's a part of your routine, let's say you opt to read before you go to bed. Well, if something happened and it threw your entire day off and you got to bed later than usual, you'll find that you don't feel normal, like, oh man, I feel like I'm missing something. It's because you're missing that part of your routine, right? And that's really where we want to get to. We want to get to the point where reading has become such a part of what we do that it's become second nature. We want to make sure that when you read, you are in a quiet and comfortable spot. right? We can adjust the lighting in that particular environment just so we're not straining our eyes. There are like book lamps if you live in a space where you don't want to have the entire light on in the room, but you are a late night reader and that is your vibe, right? I would encourage you to go online and find some reading lamps that will allow you to still read the book that you want to read, but allow the rest of the environment in your space to be dark as well if there is someone else that you are sleeping with. We want to make sure that not only are we reading books that we like, but I would also encourage you, once you get into the habit of reading, to diversify your reading portfolio, LOL, if that's a thing, right? Diversify your library is probably a better way to say that. Dabble into different topics, look at different genres and different authors, because we want to make sure that our reading experience is always fresh and it's engaging, right? We want to make sure that we're able to expand our horizons and really develop a more well-rounded understanding of the world. There are certain things that I have understood and learned from my reading journey that has been crucial. When you are in an airport, for example, and those lines can be pretty long, and so the person behind you or in front of you begins talking to you, and next thing you know, you guys are knee deep in a conversation about goats. But I live in Atlanta. I don't live in a farm town, but how can I speak to someone about a goat farm and hold a conversation about a goat farm, right? From reading. Reading expands your horizons and really allows you to want to, even if you don't necessarily know how am I ever going to use this information in life, there are certain times and certain spaces in life where sometimes being a generalist and knowing a lot and knowing a little bit about a lot of things allows you to engage in conversation. And even if you don't know, and that person may be a specialist in that area, such as goat farming, you can dive deeper. You can ask some questions. You can borrow some of their knowledge by just asking engaging questions. And so outside of course, reading just to read, I would encourage you to look at reading as a way to connect with your fellow human, right? To connect with someone that you might not have connected with otherwise. So when we get into our next practical step, I would encourage you to, as much as you can, create an environment that is conducive for your reading. Again, going back to the idea of having a reading nook, if that is something that you want to do or something that appeals to you. Most importantly, making sure that you try to read around roughly the same time every single day, and that you make sure that you're reading a book that intrigues you. Again, as we're starting out on this reading journey, it doesn't necessarily need to be the best book in the world. It doesn't necessarily need to be the longest book in the world. You may not want to start off with an autobiography if that's not your jam. You may want to start off with something that is just truly going to interest you, and that's truly going to make you say, man, I need to read. Man, I need to pick that book up again. So as we get into, guys, our last portion of today's episode, there are going to be challenges to maintaining this consistency as it comes down to reading. As it is with picking up any new habit, there is always going to be something or someone that is going to make this a bit of a challenge, right? So first off, we're going to just start by acknowledging that, hey, this is a new habit. This is something that I'm already trying to squeeze into my busy schedule. I kind of don't really have time to do this, but because I want to do it, I'm going to evaluate my busy schedule, and I'm going to look for spaces where I can insert a little bit more reading into my day, right? So when we think about reading, I don't want you guys to get focused so much so on the time, right? Like, oh, I can only read for 5 minutes. That is okay, right? In the midst of a hectic schedule, micro reading moments matter. They matter a lot. If you can spare a few minutes while you may be on a train, while you're waiting in line before you go and drift off to sleep, those little snippets of time are still eating away at progress. And on this podcast where we talk about all things consistency, I'm personally a fan of micro reading moments because you're not giving up. You're still making progress. It may not be as much as you made yesterday, but you're chipping away at that reading every single day. And that is what's huge. I would also encourage you, when we think about maintaining consistency in this area, is to set realistic goals about how much can you read, right? If a chapter is 40 pages, it may not be realistic for you to get through that in one setting, even though it's just one chapter, right? You may say, okay, I can only read 5 pages a day, right? Whatever that looks like for you, do that, right? Make sure that you're setting those realistic goals, because it is accomplishing of that micro task in your macro goal of completing this entire book that is going to allow you to feel motivated to want to get after it again and again and again, especially if you are a checklist type of person where you put read 5 pages on your checklist. It's something about being able to check that box and say, I was able to accomplish this today, that is going to make you feel motivated and make you feel really, really good about doing that again the next day. And I know I've mentioned this too a few times in today's episode, but just as another plug, embrace audiobooks, guys. Audiobooks will allow you to read while you're on the move. And if your day requires you to be on the move, if you work, let's say, at a grocery store, and rather than listening to music, you decide that you're going to listen to some business books, to some books about investing, listen to those versus listening to music. I personally find that I like to do both. I like to read physical books that I am very interested in, but books that I know I'm not as interested in, but they're still good information. I'm not going to lie. I audiobook those all the way out, because I can turn that on while I'm in the car, while I'm walking. It still gives me something to listen to outside of music, and it's still good information. It's just something that I know if I were to actually have this in front of me in my hand and read this, I probably would not get through it. And so hopefully that helps you guys as well. And then the last tip that I would give you guys as it comes to maintaining your reading schedule is to try to find a book club. Try to get with your friends, your sisters, your brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, whoever it is that you're like, hey, let's try to read this book together, right? Let's share actionable insights that we've learned from reading this book together. That's always fun, right? To be able to get with someone else and actually share and learn from their experience as well with the same book, keeping you guys on the same page and really working towards a common goal, which is always fun. So hopefully, guys, when we think about the benefits of consistent reading, there are some takeaways you have from today's episode where you can establish your consistent reading routine. You can change your environment. You can make individual goals. And let's not forget, micro reading is crucial and it does count. Making sure that you read consistently, because ultimately it just leads to a fulfilling life, and it really helps you enjoy a different part of life that you might not have thought of before. And of course, guys, before we end up today's episode, we are going to end with a verse from one of the greatest books ever written, if not the greatest book ever written. It comes from Joshua 1 verse 8. This book of law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you are careful to do according to it all that is written in it. For then you may make your way prosperous and you will have good success. So guys, if we don't read anything else, we should at least make time to read the Word of God. Remember, guys, consistency breeds mastery and transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of The Key to Consistency. Wherever you are listening to this podcast, it would mean everything to me if you could rate it, review it, reach out to me on Instagram. Would love your feedback, would love to hear anything you like, anything you don't like. Please feel free to share this episode with someone that you think could benefit from it. And until next time, bye guys.